Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on how you can start using Fetch to make API requests. Fetch is an inbuilt method available in JavaScript for this purpose, and in this video we're going to be looking at how we can make GET requests using Fetch, also post, put and delete requests. This video is for new learners of JavaScript who are just becoming familiar with HTTP requests, as well as more advanced users who up until this point have maybe been using something like jQuery to handle HTTP requests. This is a way we can do it without using any kind of external library. The functionality is inbuilt to JavaScript. So let's get going. What I'm going to start with is we're going to visit this website. So I've already got this up here, and the website in question, it's an API that you can use for testing purposes, and it just you can get, post, put and delete user data. So in the documentation, this gives us all the information we need to make the requests that we want to using Fetch. So first of all, let's make a GET request. So I want to just give you an example of a basic GET request where we just get the users. So /API/users is the endpoint, and we should get an object back that looks like this if the request is successful. So I'm going to head back to my code here. So I'm just going to have this down here ready to insert. So to start using Fetch, it's available on the global window object. So we can just write Fetch, and then as a first argument, it takes the endpoint. So as the endpoint, we have the website here, and the API endpoint is /API/users. Now, believe it or not, that's all you need to do to make a GET request using Fetch, and that is because Fetch makes a GET request by default. Now, how do we access the result of this Fetch request? What does Fetch return actually? So I'm going to log that to the console so we can see what this Fetch is returning, that hopefully is successful. So going to refresh the page here, and it returns a promise. So to handle the result of a Fetch request, we need to handle it using promise syntax. If you're not familiar with this, I have a video on how you can write your own promises and handle the results of them. I'm not going to go deeply into how you do it here, but I'm going to try and make it understandable to follow, just in case you're not already familiar with that syntax. Okay, so to access the result, we use .then. So that's how we access the result of a promise. And then the response object is available to us automatically as a parameter. And what I'm going to do is just log that to the console. Right, let's head over and take a look at it. So if you're already familiar with making HTTP requests, you'll be very familiar with response objects. This is for those of you that are very new, this is what we get back. This is not sort of Fetch specific. So we can see status 200, OK is true. So our request was successful, and now we want to access the body of the response. Now with Fetch, the way we do this is we need to apply the JSON method to the response object, and that's going to extract from the body of the response object. That's going to extract the body of the response object, and it's going to return it in as a JavaScript object, so we can use it easily because it's originally in JSON format. So let's take a look at that now. So we've already got what we want, hopefully we do, which is the data. So let's have a look at that now. And if I access this, this is a JavaScript object now, and we can see in the data we've got lots of different users and various information about the users. That, by the way, is all fictitious. Okay, so that's how you make a basic GET request using fetch. What we haven't talked about up until this point, though, is error handling, and this is very important. So how do you handle an error with fetch? Well, the first thing we'd want to do is check whether the response was okay or not. So we looked at the response object previously, and we saw that we have a property there, okay, and the value for our GET request was true. But when the request is not successful, that would be false. So the first error handling procedure we can employ is to first of all check the response object, check that that value is true. So take the response object, and then what I'm going to include here, I'm going to create an if statement, if res.ok. Okay, if that's true, actually we don't need to include that. If it's true, then it's going to return, what we'll do is we'll just have won't return anything, we'll just log to the console, get request successful, else which won't be activated by this particular request, console.log get request unsuccessful. So we're handling, this would handle if the result doesn't return true. If the OK property, the value isn't true. So let's refresh that, and we should see now we get request successful message before we get anything else. Okay, so we have a problem here that's come up after we've received the data. So it's because I needed to return the result, so it's available to the next then. Okay, you have to return, so otherwise nothing is available there. So that should now be working. Okay, so we get request successful, and then we get our result. And just to finish off with the get request, we have the catch. So catch is different from what we did before. This is what happens if we contact the server and the server gives us an unsuccessful response, then else is triggered. What if fetch itself doesn't even manage to communicate with the server, if there's a more fundamental error like this? Okay, so it never actually gets to contact the server. In that case, catch will be activated, and because it will catch an error, and we can log that error object to the console like this. So now we get this type error failed to fetch. So it doesn't give us much information there, but it's letting us know that basically fetch failed altogether. But if it's a server problem, oh, don't want to delete that. If it's a server problem, so let me just recreate the endpoint there. So if the so this is what happens if there's a fundamental problem. If there's a problem with the server, we're activating this. So these are two different types of error handling we're engaging in there. Okay, one final thing I want to mention for this, it's not really anything to do with fetch itself. It's to do with how you get this data outside of this promise chain. So the way that I usually do that is I create a new function. So I'm going to call it here and then create it in a moment. So handle data, passing in data, and then create the actual function definition down here. So handle data, And then we can do a console.log data. Okay, so now the data is inside a good old regular function, and you can now use this as well. This is actually being logged from inside the function, no longer inside the promise chain. So that's the difference there. And then you can go and really do what you want with it. I'm going to delete that again now, and we'll go back to just logging it to the console, because we're not really talking about handling data in this video, but we're talking about the actual process of making the HTTP request. Okay, I'm going to comment that out now, and we'll move on to our next type of request, which is post. Now, the way you do this using fetch is, well, first of all, we have to know what endpoint we're making the request to. So we need to return to our API documentation. And here's how we make a post request, and we create a new user this way. So the endpoint is API users. This is actually the same one that we used before, and it's expecting data in this format, okay? And then we'll get if it's successful, we'll get a 201 response, and we should get this nice little notification here as a response that that our user was created. So we get a little created at timestamp here. Okay, so let's put that into action. The endpoint, the endpoint for a post is, okay, that is the same, so we don't actually need to change that at all. Okay, so I can just copy that actually from our GET request. And then the important difference, if you're making any other type of request other than GET, is you have to actually let fetch know explicitly that that's what you're doing. So the way you specify this is the method, and we want to specify here that this is a post request. Okay, and then we need to include a header, and in the header we let the server know what type of data we are going to be sending. So we do that by typing, and you're probably familiar with this if you have made HTTP requests before. If you haven't, this might be new to you, but basically this is just meta information that we're providing to the server about what's going to be in the body. So application/JSON. So now the server knows that we're sending data in this format. Now we get to really the meat of the issue, which is the data itself. Now, don't just post the data in as it is, because it's going to be a JavaScript object and the server's not going to like that. It needs to be in JSON format. So the way that we do this is we call JSON.stringify and then pass the data inside. So I'm going to just head over to the website again. It's expecting JSON string with the following information: name and job. So I'm going to change this to change some of this information to Jimmy developer. Okay, and I also need to add a comma there. Okay, and this, well, actually, this should be enough now. So we've got the method, post, headers is the content type to expect, and we've got our, we've sent our data there. So this should work. It's a lot longer, obviously, than a GET request, but this time we're actually sending data to the server. So we're not just receiving it. Of course, it's going to be a little bit longer. And then we can access the result of this in exactly the same way, because we were told by the documentation to expect a response. So I'm going to console log the response object, and that should also let me know whether it's been successful. So let's refresh. Okay, so our response was successful. We got status 201, OK is true. Now, what I want to do is, again, apply the JSON method to the response object. This gets the body, extracts the body in, and returns it as a JavaScript object so we can use it. And then I want to just log that to the console. And we should see that information with the timestamp and everything. So there we go. We've got the created at property, ID 460 developer Jimmy. Okay, great. Now I know, because I was testing this earlier, that this actually doesn't create someone that is saved there that we can then access. But I'm going to try anyway to access this user 460 so you can actually see our error handling in the get request in action. So going to comment out our post request for now. Come back to that. I want to uncomment this. Sorry guys, just a moment. Okay, and the user ID was 460. So the way you access a user with this endpoint is you type in the ID after the user like this. So see, if you want to get a single user, API/users/the ID number. So I know this isn't going to work, but what I want to show you is we should then get our get request unsuccessful through here, hopefully. So we didn't get to see that before. So there you go, get request unsuccessful, and we get this empty object. Okay, so back to our post request. So this is pretty much done actually now. All we would maybe want to do is have a catch in case the fetch itself fails. And we could also add the post successful, and actually we'll do that because this is good practice to do this, because otherwise the error could be silent and you just get an empty object back. So let's add that here as well. And we're returning res, so this should, it's a little bit untidy. Let's just tidy that up a bit. And let's see now, we should get the same, it should be the same result as when we first made a post request, but this time we should get our, okay, so I didn't change the actual string there. But you can see that it's activating this message in the same way. So that should be post. Post request successful. There's our result. So you can see now, I'm going to delete that there. So you can see now how we can make a GET request and how we can make a POST request, how we can handle the result, and how we can also handle errors, both in terms of the fetch request itself, also if the server returns an error. Next, let's look at a put request. So first of all, let's find out the endpoint for put, which is the same as if you were posting a user. So we can actually that's not the same as the user. The user we just post to the user's endpoint. With a put request, we have to specify the we have to specify the user ID number that we want to replace. So let's practice this. It's actually really similar to a post request. We're just overwriting the information. So we only have to make some modifications to our fetch request. So method put, we've specified the user ID should be 2. We want to override it with this information, and then I'm going to change this text here so we get put request successful. And let's have a look. We should be getting something back from a put request. Let's go back. So as you see here, now we get an updated at property instead. So that's very, very similar to our put request. I'm just going to then have a look and see how this works. Put request successful, updated at, and we got the timestamp. So that was successful too. Finally, how do we do a delete request? This is simpler because we're not sending any data to the server. Now, I know from the documentation that for a fetch request, for a fetch delete request, we can just copy this. I'm just going to copy the main fetch request, not the handling, just to save a little bit of time. Okay, and it's the same endpoint. We just have to specify the ID of the user at the end that we want to delete. So we'll try and delete user 2. The method is delete this time, and we still need a header, but we don't need any body. Okay. Now, do we get a response object? Okay, we don't. We should just get a 204 response if it was successful, but nothing back apart from that. So there should be no body there. Okay, so all we need to do then is handle this. So I'm just going to write this from new dot then response object, and we should get all the information we want in this response object as to whether it's been successful or not. And we can also add, of course, we can also handle the error in case there is one in this way. This way again. Okay, so it's exactly the same method. We're checking if the response, if it's okay, and then we'll say delete request successful, delete request unsuccessful, and then I want to log it to the console. So let's see, hopefully this works as well. Delete request successful, and we're getting the status 204. That has worked. There's no body to check this time, but we already know that it's worked based on the response object. So that's actually it for using Fetch to make HTTP requests. I hope you found this video useful and you feel confident using Fetch in your own project now. If you did enjoy this video and you'd like to get more content from us, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Open JavaScript.